right, well, let's move to defensive linemen and figure out where these are going to. There are some interesting prospects. I think you have two guys that are almost certainly going to go in the first round, but we could see even more. And I think the crazier thing is that we have high need. It seems like there are a lot of teams that need defensive linemen this year. So let's start with Byron Murphy out of Texas. What do you think of him, Dudes? And where do you think is his best fit?
The best natural pass rusher in this draft, edge or D tackle. Plays with great leverage. Love his tape. There's times when you see on tape, Brees, where he's the zero technique. And for people that don't know what that means, he's head up on the center, right? But the Texas team had Trevon Sweat, who I think we're going to talk about later, who was 362. That just lets you know the mentality of, what Byron Murphy brings and the leverage that he plays with. The Alabama game, I remember there was a scoop block, essentially a double team with the center and guard. Brees, he's so athletic and flexible that he was able to get up under both of the guys, drop a knee to the ground, split the double team, and make a play on the running back in the backfield. And I talk about his natural pass rush ability. His feet never stop when he's rushing the quarterback. He can hit you with an arsenal of moves, and he's always working towards the quarterback. You never see him being stuck at the line of scrimmage. And it's rare that any teams single block him because you can't single block him. He's that explosive off the line of scrimmage. So he's my number one D tackle. I think in the mock, if I'm not mistaken, I had him going to the Rams. Wow, surprise, right? They lose Aaron Donald, and they get a guy that can be a foundational piece on that defensive line. And you pair him with Kobe Turner. I mean, Sean McVay has to be licking his chops if Byron Murphy slips past 16 with the Seattle Seahawks and he slips past Seattle and it's there for him at 19. He's probably going to run that card in.
And the crazy thing is the Rams haven't had a first-round pick since 2016.
Exactly.
And then Aaron Donald retires, and now you might have the best pass or defensive lineman in the draft just kind of fall in your lap. Let me ask you this, though, because you mentioned Trevon Sweat, and I'm glad you did, and we'll talk about him a little more later. But do you think there's a situation when you have two high prospects like this where one of them benefited from playing with the other one? Do you think Trevon Sweat was a little bit better because Byron Murphy was so good, or maybe Byron Murphy's looked a little better because teams were so worried about Sweat?
Two totally different skill sets. I just think that they fed off each other really well. I just think there's night and day between Byron Murphy and Trevon Sweat. And then also when you look at Sweat, he's more of an old school type player. We kind of talked about Jeremiah Trotter in that way, where with Sweat, you're probably only going to get first and second down. Now, he has been able to push the pocket a little bit, but he's not a pass rusher, right? And he's 360 pounds. So you also worry how many plays can he play in a row before he's gassed. Like, that's a real concern. So I just think they had two totally different skill sets, Brees. I don't think one benefited more from playing with the other.
Yeah, and for Byron Murphy, you mentioned the Seahawks that the Rams will have to hope he falls there. And I think the Bengals could be a possible landing
spot. That's why I
said
the Bengals too.
Yeah, because it feels like obviously they need to bring in a replacement for DJ Reader, which they haven't really done yet. Just someone strong on the defensive line. I do think the Bengals probably are eyeing offensive linemen. But again, it's one of those situations where you have your top four tackles off the board or something. There's no reason to reach for the fifth best guy when you have possibly the best defensive lineman fall in your lap. All right, let's go to the guy who's kind of 1B on the defensive line board, and that is Johnny Newton out of Illinois. Dudes, what do you think of him, and where do you think he ends up?
And you stated it perfect, Brees, 1B, because that's how I look at it, right? Like, I went back and forth. I was having this discussion with our Ryan Wilson the other day, and, I broke down Byron Murphy, earlier in the process, looked at him a little bit later, but I just really rewatched Johnny Newton's tape again, and I'm like, dang, am I sure Byron Murphy's number one? But I am sure. I think the difference is when you're talking about the leverage that Byron Murphy can play with against the run, I think it supersedes what Johnny Newton can do. Sometimes you'll see Johnny Newton get engulfed by offensive linemen, but nobody rushes with a better rush plan from the defensive tackle position than Johnny Newton. We kind of talked about Latu in that manner earlier in the show in regards to always having a plan, right? Johnny Newton, the same thing. He never just rushes and runs down the middle of somebody, Brees. He always has a plan, does a really good job with swipes, clubs, to win against quarterbacks. And you also see him win with power as well. So I slated him going, another surprise, going to the Miami Dolphins. They lost Christian Wilkins, right? Why not replace Christian Wilkins with a guy, to me, who's actually a better rusher than Christian Wilkins, but you can use in a multitude of ways as well. And he's not going to be a liability against the run. He does a really good job of knocking guys back as a penetrating three technique.
Yeah, I think both the Rams or Dolphins would be happy to get Murphy or Newton if either guy ends up falling down there. All right, let's go to Braden Fisk. It really kind of blows my mind that we could have, we just talked about Trevon Sweat and Byron Murphy both on that Texas defensive line. And now we're talking about Braden Fisk and Jared Verse. Jared Verse obviously going to be taken higher in the draft, but what do you think of Braden Fisk? You think he could be a first rounder? Where do you have him ending up? What's your take on him?
Yeah, I think his sweet spot is early second round, right? This is a high motor guy. The motor never stops. One of the best pass rushing defensive tackles in this draft as well. And people question his arm length going into it. But the thing is, his mindset is, I know I have to be quicker off the snap than the offensive line, because if I get into him before he gets into me, I can win the rep. And that's how, when you look at it on film, that's what it looks like. When you look at the Florida game, when you look at the Louisville game where he takes over, I mean, his get off is crazy. And I was talking to Ryan Wilson about him going into the Senior Bowl week because, a lot of people probably had him as a, fourth round pick, maybe chance late third. And I told Ryan, I said, that's my D tackle 3. I said, you need to pay attention to this dude. And sure enough, after the Senior Bowl, I had already seen it on tape, but after the Senior Bowl, there was no more questions. He was D tackle 3 after that. And then to double down on that, Brees, he went and literally destroyed the combine, right? So now you're talking about, could he go in the top 10 of the second round, which I have him going to the Houston Texans. They lost Nico Collins. Supposedly they were in the running for Eric Armstead, didn't get him. Why not replace him with a guy like Braden Fisk, who fits exactly what my guy DeMeco Ryans wants to do with the Houston Texans in that defensive line. They want to come at you at waves. They got Danielle Hunter. They did lose Jonathan Gennard, but they signed Danielle Hunter. Imagine adding Braden Fisk, Danielle Hunter, and having Will Anderson on that defensive line. And they got Danico Autry as well. Woo! That's a front four from hell.
And I feel like Danico Autry is one of those underrated signings.
The most underrated player for the last decade in the NFL.
Insane.
I've been saying it.
And DeMeco Ryans knows how to build a defense. I mean, obviously, he was good defense coordinator with the 49ers, and he's just you get a little worried when they get hired as head coach. Maybe they're in over their head, especially their first year, and you got to delegate and figure out what you're doing. He didn't need that. He didn't need that warm-up period. And, man, their defense is loaded. All right, let's move on to Michael Hall Jr. Right, dudes. Where do you think he ends up, and what do you think of him?
Yeah, so we talked about Kobe Turner earlier, right? Kind of undersized D-tackle, pass rush ability. Michael Hall fits in that same manner, and that was the argument with Rick last year. Like, he didn't realize the way the league is changing. There's a place for designated pass rushers in the interior defensive line. Also, we've also seen an influx, Brees, of defensive tackles getting paid like their counterparts on the edge. When you talk about guys like Quentin Williams getting paid, Ed Oliver getting paid, right? The 2 D tackles with the Washington Commanders, Chris Jones. Like, if you can affect the quarterback, there's a role for you on the team. I think Michael Hall to the Cincinnati Bengals, we could have projected Byron Murphy potentially going there, but why not send Michael Hall, one of the best first step get-offs in this draft, 3 technique that can penetrate, pair him with a guy like BJ Hill and Sheldon Rankins, who you just signed on a 1-year deal. I think makes a lot of sense to send him to Cincinnati.
Yeah, I mean, as the official Bengals homer on this podcast, I would be thrilled if Michael Hall Jr. landed in their lap at 49th overall. And that could happen if they end up taking the offensive lineman at 18th overall. But they do have a lot of options. And again, they do need to fill that hole that was left by DJ Reader. All right, our last defensive lineman, we mentioned him a little bit earlier, Trevon Sweat. Who knows what's going to happen with him now, because he got in trouble, dealing with some legal issues. Just, man, all you got to do is stay out of trouble in the month of April, or your draft stock is going to tank. It looked like maybe he was second rounder probably before last week. I mean,
I would say I had him in the third. I don't know if
third. Okay, but do you think this drops his draft stock? And where do you have him going now?
Well, yeah, I think it will drop his draft stock because supposedly, just talking to a few people, that was the question mark about him. Some of his partying ways, and I hate putting rumors out there, but usually it's not a really good look when you get pulled over and get a DWI 2 weeks before the draft because you're technically still in the process, Brees. Right? Teams could still potentially work you out in private workouts, and for you to get a DUI this close to the draft, when this is going to be probably one of the most important moments in your life, I think teams are going to look at that. I think it may drop him to the 4th round. So I mocked him to the 4th round to the Seattle Seahawks. They did repay and sign Leonard Williams to an extension. They have Draymond Jones as a guy that can play inside and outside. I think they could use a run stuffing guy. They've always had a guy like Red Bryant or Al Woods. I think Trevon Sweat could be that guy for them. They had Poona Ford for a lot of years as well. I think it makes a lot of sense to have a guy, even though now McDonald's going over there. Let's not forget he had a guy that was similar to him, and Michael Pierce at the Baltimore Ravens. So Trevon Sweat to the Seattle Seahawks is where I mocked him in the 4th round.
Yeah, McDonald loves those types of guys. And, I'm just going to mention the Bengals again. If they don't end up if they don't get the defensive lineman in the 1st round, they don't get him in the 2nd round, and Trevon Sweat falls to the 4th round, they pick at 115, and I would be thrilled if they got him there.